I know the secret to how Star Trek has lasted for over 55 years. Are you listening, Paramount executives? You might need a little bit of help with this. That's today's topic on Trek Thoughts. Greetings, Akomomai and Nukhne to my fellow Star Trek fans. I am Captain Kanaka, the Trek historian, and I would like to introduce you to Trek Thoughts. Couple things to talk about before we get on to today's topic. If you have a Trek Thought idea, please let me know in the comments below. Also, as I am new to the YouTube environment, please feel free to give me any advice for improvement. Any little bit helps. And as always, if you like what you see, please share and subscribe. Happy to have y'all aboard today for this very special topic about Star Trek success. Now, as of the taping of this video, Star Trek has been around for 55 years. And when you really take a look at that, folks, that's kind of amazing. All other franchises with this kind of length come from other kinds of storytelling. For example, Superman, Batman came from comic books. Star Trek is an anomaly, whereas other elements of popular culture came from books and transitioned into movies and television. Star Trek went the other way around. So how did it happen? Well, I'd like to offer my own perspective, both as a lifelong Star Trek fan and a professional historian. Let's take a look here. Secret number one, modest budgets. Now, folks, it's easy to forget this, especially considering that we are over 10 years since the J.J. Abrams big bombastic reboot. But for years, for most of Star Trek's history, Star Trek has been relatively low budget. That is actually a benefit. It is not a liability to Star Trek. For example, science fiction stories, especially those set in outer space, can be extremely expensive. However, from design, Star Trek was built to be affordable. When Star Trek was originally pitched by Roddenberry and then later enhanced by so many other creative individuals in Hollywood, specific creative stipulations were built into the concept of the show to make Star Trek as economically sound as possible. These stipulations might be things you take for granted, but during the mid-1960s, they were almost deal breakers if they went the other way. For example, having the Enterprise crew visit Earth-like planets with similar Earth-like cultures. This is kind of a silly thing to see because you have people from the 23rd century going around on gangster planets and Nazi planets. All this comes together, folks, and it plays a very interesting role in discussing how cultures develop. And they even cite something like this in Star Trek.
But they are creatures of a heavily industrialized 20th century type planet, very much like Earth. An amazing example of Hodgkin's law of parallel planet development.
Yeah, that one. The most famous of all the cost-saving measures in the creative structure of Star Trek is the transporter beam. One concept that almost broke the bank when pitching Star Trek to the studios was the logistical and storytelling problem of how would you get characters from outer space to the planet's surface. Customarily, this was done by having the starship actually land on the planet, flying saucer style. This was profoundly prohibitive. So instead, they created a transporter beam. It says and does everything landing the ship would do, but at a fraction of the cost. This trend only continued when Star Trek made the jump to the silver screen. Case in point, Star Trek, the motion picture. Major sci-fi extravaganza. Everything, the ship, everything goes boom. But really and truly, let's take a look at the numbers here. It had a $35 million budget. That's pretty big money back then. Its production budget. Star Trek barely broke even, with a reported box office gross of $87 million. Significant return, but when you take into account that you need roughly 2.5 times the production budget, Star Trek the Motion Picture was not a colossal success, not by a long shot. Juxtapose that to Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. In that situation, you have the complete opposite of Star Trek the Motion Picture. You have the story first and the special effects second. Clearly, that's where the priority was, folks. So many recycled shots are borrowed, if not stolen, from Star Trek the Motion Picture to make Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan a reality. But you don't care, because the focus is on the characters, the relationships between each other, the stakes, the story. Those are the key elements there. And the results speak for themselves, folks. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan is reported to have an $11 million budget. At the end of the day, it made a $78.9 million return. Huge profit, essentially greenlit Star Trek 3, and Star Trek 4 based off of The Return of Wrath of Khan. Now, even though it's less than motion picture, you take a look at the fact that it basically made up its production budget on opening weekend, the secret becomes self-evident, folks. Modest, manageable budgets are the key to making Star Trek succeed. Also, this narrower budget not only puts more focus on creative style storytelling, it also protects the studio if the storytelling ever goes off the rails, which I can tell you has never ever happened in the history of Star Trek.
I said, what does God need with a starship?
What are these, little chunks?
The essence of the male, chopped and seasoned.
I did fall asleep reading a particularly erotic chapter in my grandmother's journal.
Okay, I stand corrected. Either way, speaking of storytelling, folks, that brings us to our next secret: superior storytelling. Now, folks, this secret could be its own complete episode of Trek Thoughts, so I'm going to be as brief as I can. With budgets restricted to styrofoam rock levels, the redeeming qualities of Star Trek rests in its storytelling, and it delivers at its best big time. Star Trek's superior storytelling can be broken down into three crucial ingredients. The first crucial ingredient is authentic characters. A truly authentic character transcends their function in the story and leaves such an impression on the audience that they know how the character would react in a real-life situation. How would Quark from Star Trek Deep Space Nine handle himself during a deposition? What would Seven of Nine do on a vacation? Which book would Captain Jean-Luc Picard choose if he decided to run a book club? Now, I picked these specific questions because these situations for these characters are completely divorced from their function in the story. And yet, you have a very specific answer to each of those questions beyond the, well, I don't know. That is what makes classic Trek characters come alive. If you can explain what they would think about any given situation in your life, you have created an authentic character. That gives me an idea. How would you think a Trek character would spend the pandemic? So now that you have authentic characters, the next step in building superior signature storytelling is a compelling story. Now, ideally, a compelling story gives the authentic characters an opportunity to grow by confronting a complex challenge for which they were not previously prepared. With all that said, folks, real quick, to be clear, it is okay to give your characters limits, weaknesses, and flaws. Think of it this way, folks. If one character from Star Trek could do absolutely everything, there would be no need for a crew. It'd just be one guy named Dave doing everything. Another thing to point out is that a complex challenge does not need to be needlessly convoluted. We're not talking Inception here, folks. A complex challenge simply means it involves a situation that takes more than 5 minutes to solve. And usually that complexity deals with themes, something that challenges the audience, something that can fuel conversations long after the 45-minute episode or 2-hour theatrical feature has wrapped. That is how you make a compelling story. The final component of making signature superior storytelling is tone. Now, tone is defined as the emotions, tropes, and themes intentionally designed for the audience to consume. When a franchise gets really effective and consistent with its tone, it becomes immortalized as its own style of storytelling. Case in point, although Star Trek, Star Wars, and Terminator are all science fiction franchises, each franchise has their own unique tone which you instantly recognize whether you're watching the actual franchise itself or a parody. So, what's the signature tone of Star Trek? Well, when you look past the plots, Star Trek boils down to one core concept: positive science fiction. Isaac Asimov defined science fiction as the human reaction to changes in science and technology. While most science fiction famously goes negative in reacting to changes in science and technology, Star Trek holds the distinction of being positive. And when I say positive, folks, I mean that in every single sense of the word. When resolving the complex challenge mentioned earlier, characters usually learn something. They add to their knowledge. Also, there's the positive progressivism of Star Trek. When Star Trek is at its best, all perspectives of the human condition and even the galactic community are included and everyone gains dignity, respect, and empowerment. Everyone. And folks, this kind of positive messaging can be profoundly empowering. With that in mind, that empowerment deals with the third and final variable to Star Trek's success, and that is the fans. Modest budgets are nice. They keep the bean counters at Hollywood happy. Superior storytelling is great because it elevates certain episodes of Star Trek over otherwise disposable television entertainment. But the crucial aspect to making Star Trek last lies in its fans. If not for the fan base, folks, the entire Star Trek universe would have been canceled within the first 2 seasons of the original series. Executives complained that Star Trek wasn't as popular as Lost in Space. The Star Trek franchise broke new ground in the relationship between pop culture and traditional culture. For starters, the first space shuttle ever built was named Enterprise after an aggressive writing campaign from Star Trek superfans Bijou and John Trimble. If not for Star Trek fans, folks, the first space shuttle ever invented would have been called Constitution in honor of America's bicentennial. Somewhere along the way, flip phones and video conferencing became a thing. Remember when I said that the transporter was a cost-saving storytelling measure? Well, not anymore. Scientists are now researching quantum teleportation. Finally, Supreme Court decisions are citing Vulcan proverbs. I don't want to brag, folks, but you don't see any of that from any other franchise. Not Lost in Space and not that other Star franchise. Not to mention, many of America's biggest leaders and modern cultural figures are fans of Star Trek. These include civil rights leaders such as Dr. King, ambassadors and statesmen such as Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, former presidents such as Barack Obama. Folks, we even have military generals such as United States Marine Corps Commandant General Robert Neller. And there are so many others, folks. These 3 secrets to Star Trek's success almost perfectly connect, as you can see by this diagram here. Each is crucial to making the other happen. And that is what makes Star Trek as a franchise last for 55 years and counting. But what do you think? Is there a variable to this equation that I'm missing? Please let me know in the comments. With that in mind, folks, live long and prosper, e malama pono, and see you next time. Greetings again, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you have any constructive criticism for me, please let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you like what you see and like to see more, please like, share, and subscribe. With that said, e malama pono, live long and prosper, and see you next time.